Hi, third grade. Amon's Adventure, chapter 21. It's called Jesus. The rest of the afternoon and evening were a blur to Amon. He walked around in a daze, his feet moving only because they knew how to do that on their own. Tamar, too, was unusually quiet, lost in thought. Benjamin seemed least affected by the scribe's words. He said, "How can a high priest steal?" about 3 times, but then shrugged it off and got back to the business of enjoying his day. But Benjamin's question wasn't what haunted Amon. The thoughts that plagued him had to do with a solution to the problem. How does one prove the high priest is a thief and a liar? Even if Neri agreed to testify before a court, there is no court by which you can try a high priest. He is accountable to no one except God. There is no one to whom you can prove there was no urgent matter of state that Caiaphas had left Amon's father alone on purpose so that he could later accuse him. No one to whom you can say that Caiaphas himself had stolen the money. This dilemma pestered Amon all day. Just before dawn, he gave up trying to sleep and stood at the short wall that encircled the roof. He looked out over the city in the moonlight, and there and here he saw a torch or a lamp still burning behind a window. He could see the glow of bonfires reflecting off the inside of the walls where the guards stood watch at the gate, and he could see the outline of the temple, black against the sky. And black inside as well, Amon thought. Black with sin, the sin of the high priest who lies and steals and kills. For Amon, the temple would never feel the same again. Amon awoke in a start, the sun glaring in his eyes. It took him a moment to realize that he was on the roof of his house, and another moment to realize he had eventually fallen asleep. In the next moment, he realized it was Monday and that his father would be crucified in 4 days. He groped his way down the ladder and then down the stairs and found his mother working and his 2 little brothers playing. He yawned a big yawn, enough to swallow a camel, and then asked, "Where is Tamar?" "Her father returned this morning, so she and Benjamin went with him," she said. "He wanted them to meet Jesus." Amon scoffed. "I think there's more important things to do." Tabitha looked at her son. "Bartholomew asked that you would join them when you woke up." "I do not have time to meet a prophet," Amon answered, "especially a false prophet." "It would be a polite thing to do," Tabitha reminded him. "It is a fair request." Amon sighed, knowing she was right. "Where will I find them?" he asked. "At the temple," Tabitha answered, and once again Amon sighed. At the temple. But a short time later, Amon was in the court of the Gentiles in the middle of a mob of bodies. It was only 3 days until the Passover celebration, and Jerusalem was filling up with pilgrims from across the land. Some, he knew, came from as far away as Antioch to celebrate the Passover. More people meant the Romans needed more soldiers to keep the peace. And that meant, just across the courtyard in the fortress of Antonia, 1,000 Roman soldiers were waiting. They came from all over Palestine to support the regiment normally stationed at Antonia. It was for this very reason that Cornelius had come to Jerusalem from Caesarea. A few moments later, Amon was distracted by shouting from the other end of the courtyard. He pushed his way through the crowd, too short to see over the adults around him, but following the sound of the shouting. As he drew closer, he could make out the words, "Hosanna to the Son of David." The voices of children were shouting. When at last he broke through the crowd, Amon saw that 2 of those voices belonged to Tamar and Benjamin. "Hosanna," they shouted, and Amon could see that they were directing their praise to a man seated on a stool surrounded by children. Then he saw it was Jesus. Amon stared in curiosity. The man was just a man. He looked like any other Jew, a bit taller perhaps, strong arms from the hard labor of a Jew, but gentle hands that stroked the hair of a small girl. He smiled easily, this man, and he laughed at the smallest of jokes from one of the children. But for Amon, it was none of this that struck him deaf and dumb and made him stare in awe. For Amon, it was the eyes. Crystal clear, piercing, yet with a kindness that covered Amon like a cloak. And then, quite unexpectedly, Jesus slowly raised his eyes and stared straight into Amon's. Lightning flashed through every corner of Amon's body. He sucked in his breath and held it. It was as if he had known this man all his life, and in that one gaze found a trustworthy friendship. Their eyes locked for several minutes, and Amon saw the man's smile grow just a bit bigger, and saw him nod in acknowledgement just slightly with the tip of his head. Suddenly, Amon felt a tug on his sleeve. He broke off eye contact with the Jew and looked to see Benjamin at his side. "It was a miracle," Benjamin was shouting. "What was a miracle?" Amon asked. "He healed them," Benjamin explained. "He healed all of them." Amon gave a patient sigh. "Who healed whom?" "Jesus," he shouted, as if Amon were on the other side of the courtyard. "Jesus healed everyone that came to him. Blind people, sick people, crippled people. He healed them all." Amon gave a second sigh, feeling a bit sorry for his immature friend. "Benjamin, do you see all these people?" he asked, sweeping his arm across the crowd. Benjamin nodded. "Of course. Well, I see their legs and their feet anyhow." "And who are they?" Amon asked. But instead of waiting, he answered the question himself. "They are strangers," he said, emphasizing the word. They are people you don't know. Many of the people traveling from town to town with Jesus, pretending to be healed each time. In this way, Amon concluded his lecture, they trick people into following Jesus and giving him their money. "But I saw it," Benjamin pleaded, "with my own eyes." "Did you know any of the people healed?" Amon asked. Benjamin thought for a moment, then slowly shook his head. "Then there is your proof," Amon answered. "If he were really the Messiah, he could heal people you know, not just the ones you don't know." Benjamin's shoulders slumped as he hung his head. Amon felt badly at making his friend sad, but knew it was for his own good. Just then, a line of tall men in robes pushed their way through the children to stand in front of Jesus. Herodians! These are the followers of the high priest and of Herod, the men who were plotting to kill Jesus and Amon's father. The line of men shoved the children aside and formed a half circle around Jesus. They stood with their arms crossed and stared, and Jesus stared back. For a long moment there was silence. Then one by one the men lost the smug looks on their face and instead looked confused. They started glancing back and forth at each other, as if they were unsure who was supposed to speak. Finally, one particular hairy Herodian stepped forward, his arms still crossed over his chest. The Herodian cleared his throat. "Teacher," he started, and the people hushed. "We know you are a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth." The man was speaking very loudly, and Amon figured he was trying to impress all the people in the courtyard. "You aren't swayed by men," the Herodian continued, "because you pay no attention to who they are." At this, the hairy man started to circle around Jesus, moving out of his sight and behind him. Amon could see that the Herodian was trying to make Jesus nervous. "Tell us then," the friend of the high priest continued, "what is your opinion? Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" A gasp suddenly went across the crowd. For a moment, the courtyard was filled with the murmurs of speculation. How could Jesus answer such a question? Had the Herodian found a question too difficult for even the Messiah to answer? Amon knew what was going on. The high priest had no doubt sent this band of troublemakers to trick Jesus. If Jesus said he could pay taxes, then he would be breaking the Jewish law forbidding the use of images as idols. If he said they should not, he would be breaking the law of the Romans, who thought that Caesar was a god. Either way, Jesus would lose. The crowd quieted down as Jesus lifted a small girl off of his lap and set her to the ground. Slowly he stood, keeping his back to the spokesman of the Herodians and his eyes on the rest of the gang. Jesus shook his head slowly as if he couldn't understand these men. Finally, he drew a deep breath. "You hypocrites," he said, his whisper a marked contrast to the loud rantings of the Herodian. "Why are you trying to trap me?" He looked from one man to the next, waiting for an answer that did not come. Instead, one by one, the Herodians uncrossed their arms, wiped their sweaty palms on their tunics, and lowered their gazes to the ground. Now Jesus simply nodded as if he understood. "Show me the coin used for paying the tax," he said, holding out his palm up. One of the Herodians quickly fumbled for his money pouch and scurried forward, placing a denarius in Jesus' hand. Jesus held the coin between his thumb and first finger and lifted it high for all to see. "Whose portrait is on this coin?" he said in a booming voice. "And whose inscription?" The Herodians looked back and forth at each other, the question so obvious that they thought it was a trick. "It is Caesar's," several of them answered finally. Jesus stared at them once again as if they were naughty little boys caught doing something during Torah lessons. In a voice that was full of exasperation, he said to them, "Then give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's." Every pair of Herodian eyes grew wide at this answer. Not knowing how to respond and not even fully understanding, the Herodians quietly turned and slipped back into the crowd. "Did you hear that?" Benjamin cheered to Amon. "Did you hear how he... Amon!" Amon ignored his friend. He was staring off into the sky as if he expected an angel to appear right then and there. A few moments later, his eyes widened and he grinned. Grabbing Benjamin by the tunic, he shouted, "That's it!" "What's it?" Benjamin asked. Amon still didn't answer his friend and started shoving his way through the crowd, passing Tamar. "Amon, wait!" Tamar cried. "Amon, what is it?" Benjamin yelled as he stumbled to keep up. Amon stopped and spun around to face his two friends. "I've just figured out how to save my father," he shouted. "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's." And then he disappeared into the crowd. Here's the after part. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." Matthew 19 and verse 14. When children gathered around Jesus, they instinctively knew he was someone special, someone who cared for them, someone they could trust. Even Amon felt himself being moved by the honest eyes of Jesus. But then he turned away and refused to believe in the Messiah because of what others had said and because he'd never taken time to know Jesus. You may have heard about Jesus all of your life to a point of taking him for granted. But don't think that just because the story is familiar or because your friends make fun of it, that it is not true. Consider this. Jesus knows everything about you and everything you've ever said and done, even all the bad things. Yet he still loves you with all his heart. Isn't that more important than worrying about what your friends think?